Welcome to the ExecMBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share my recent conversation with Billy Hughes. Billy is a GEMBA format graduate in our Executive MBA class of 2020. He and I recently connected via Zoom to talk more about his background, how he decided to pursue an MBA, what led him to Darden, what he gained through his experience in the Executive MBA program, and what he's been up to since graduation. Billy currently works at Victoria's Secret in their compliance group, and it was fascinating to hear about how his global travels in the program have really paid dividends for him as he's moved into this new role at Victoria's Secret. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, here is my interview with Billy Hughes. Billy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, one of the real treats of hosting the ExecMBA podcast is I get to schedule time with people I haven't seen in a little while, and I get to ask them all these questions about what they've been up to. And so the conversation that I'm sure I would have just tried to have with you anyhow on a phone call or at some sort of an event, get to have with you now here with an audience. It's great. How are you doing?
Yeah, man, I'm doing good. It's like to just chat and catch up and talk about some of the things that are going on. I was telling you before we started that today is 3 weeks since the birth of my wife and I's first child, Kate. So yeah, the sleep deprivation is real, but being a new parent's pretty awesome. So excited to chat.
Well, congratulations. Is everybody doing okay?
Yeah, everybody's good. It was a long journey to get here, but everything's been pretty easy in the first couple of weeks. Kate's eating, she's sleeping, we're somewhat sleeping. So yeah, it's all good.
That sounds about right. I do recall, I don't have kids myself, but nevertheless, talking with friends and students that had kids early in that process, I think sleep suffers a bit. You're probably awake most of the day.
It makes me appreciate like the Darden friends that I had that did it during the program, because I mean, the biggest thing we did was get married. I got married during Darden, but I remember like learning teammates that had kids, and I have a whole new appreciation for what it's like to do that and read case studies and take exams at the same time.
Yeah, the thing that I was talking about with Colin Wright-Prusky, who was here on the podcast not so long ago, was that in any given Executive MBA cohort, right, the class matriculates, you can look around the room and you can see some people who maybe have less on their plate than you do. And there's definitely people who have more. And I mean, I'm thinking about all the people who became first-time parents in this program, during this program, people who moved across the country, took on new roles. Like life continues apace while you're in the Executive MBA program.
Yeah, and I think like rolling with it is part of the whole thing. But yeah, I feel like I was definitely on the blessed to not have as many life changes side of the spectrum. So I don't know. Sometimes it helps though. Like I think one of the things, and we could talk about this if you want, about Darden was, I think it kind of taught me how to compartmentalize my time a little bit. It's kind of like, okay, got to write an essay. Got 2 hours to write the essay. I'm going to write it in those 2 hours because that's the time that I have. And that is a little bit like parenting too, where it's like, okay, we've got a feeding schedule. That's when these things are going to happen. And then the rest of life kind of fits into that schedule. And I wouldn't have been nearly as good at that had I not done the working in school thing at the same time. It makes you wonder, like people ask me like, what are you watching on, Netflix? And I was like, well, I used to do that. I used to follow sports teams. And some of those things suffered a little bit during school and now being a parent, but you try to squeeze it all in.
I love that point. I think the hardest thing to explain to prospective students, at least as an admissions officer, is, a lot of our time when we're talking with people on the phone or events is people really trying to wrestle with the time commitment.
Yeah.
How many hours per week and really trying to understand it in this. I honestly think in a way that's much more precise than the reality for most students. And it, my impression, again, as somebody who's outside of the experience, but close to the students is one, whatever tasks you have to do will conform to the amount of time that you have for those tasks in a given day, in a given week. there's a brute force aspect to this. Like, you'll just find your way through it. It's not always going to be elegant, but through determination, the support of your classmates, support of people at home, support of people at work, faculty, the list goes on, you will find your way through it. Just keep moving forward. And the thing goes by much more quickly than you expect. And you're learning a ton. You don't really have that moment to kind of like stop until almost you get to the very end. I'm thinking about our class. It's about to go to LR2 down in Charlottesville. And I think this is the first time in the program, talking with those students, they've ever had that moment to kind of like really kind of look back and like, oh my gosh, I have done so much, which is just incredible.
It's a sprint for sure. And I think on the time commitment thing, I think where I landed on that is some things I was faster at than other colleagues, and some things I was a lot slower at, and it kind of evened out. So, I was an English major, right? English and public policy. And I can bang out a paper, very quickly to a pretty decent quality bar. If you give me, the reading and sort of a topic to go after. Like, that's just one of the things that I'm good at. On the other side, probably 90% of the class can build an Excel model faster than I can for stats or decision analysis or that kind of stuff. So like, I would always have to invest more time in the quant work to get it to where I wanted it to go. And then maybe like underinvest a little bit in some of the writing stuff because it just came a little bit easier. And I think everybody kind of finds their balance and where they spend more time versus less time.
That's such a good point. Everybody comes with strengths and areas that they're going to continue to develop during the program. I think that is an important note to keep in mind, particularly when you're taking on something like an MBA program, to remind yourself that the reason why you're here is you're trying to fill in these gaps. So if you find yourself in a class and it's taking more time and maybe it's not clicking for you, to recognize like, well, that's actually good, because guess what? It means that you're going to know more than you knew when you started the program. Like, it's all growth. It's all
totally.
You're just gaining knowledge that you did not have previously.
Yeah, and that's also like the approach I took to things like electives and stuff at the end when you're starting to, as you said, look back and reflect a little bit. It's like, okay, not sure that I want to take M&A or entrepreneurial finance, but I'm going to learn a lot more in those classes, even if I'm just average or slightly better than average at it. Like, the level of learning is much greater than if I take another communications class or leadership class, and that's just, me. So I tried as best I could to kind of challenge myself with the optional classes, because I felt like even if I only got a 75% on an exam, I was still going from 0 to 75 as opposed to, 85 to 90. So I would encourage anybody to take kind of the same approach when you get to pick some of the classes.
Well, Billy, we started to get a little bit of a sense of your background. So let's talk about you and who you are, what you're doing now, but probably also equally importantly, what you did before coming to Darden. So tell us your story.
Yeah. So graduated undergrad back in 2008 from Duke and thought that I wanted to be a lawyer, but wanted to get some business experience first. And so I went to go work for a consulting firm whose clients were all general counsel, chief compliance officers, chief auditors, heads of risk management, that kind of thing. So that was Corporate Executive Board, or CEB. That's the corner of the consulting firm that I applied to, on the premise that I would get to know lawyers as clients and be able to decide if I really wanted to go to law school. Did it for a couple of years. And decided that I'd rather at some point go down the MBA route. But also there was this like little niche area called compliance and ethics that was like 5 or 10% of what a general counsel at a big company would do with their time, that I just found really interesting, because it was kind of the intersection of legal issues that big companies have to deal with, HR, behavioral science. How do you kind of create the conditions in a big Fortune 500 company to have employees speak up and have there be a strong tone at the top, and train employees the right way? And I never thought that would be a niche or area of expertise that I would find interesting. But after a couple of years at the consulting firm, I kind of specialized in that. And then CEB was bought by Gartner. And I stayed essentially at the same company for 13 years, which I feel like is like weird in this day and age. Like, I don't know that many of my friends that have had their first job out of college be the one where they stay at for a decade plus. But I felt like I was still learning, loved the subject matter area that I was in, loved my clients, got better at managing bigger and bigger teams, which was definitely a learning curve. You'd kind of do everything wrong once and learn from your mistakes. And then Darden kind of helped me think through what I wanted to do next. I'm sure you've talked about this on many, many other podcasts, but, was I a switcher or a climber or an explorer? I don't know. There's probably new monikers that you guys are using these days, but I like bounce back and forth between all of those things. I didn't know if I wanted to stay at Gartner and kind of be like a lifer consultant. I didn't know if I wanted to be climber. I don't know if I wanted to kind of explore starting my own business or being an entrepreneur. I didn't know if I wanted to switch. And so I think depending on what point in the 20 months you asked me, I would have given you a very different answer about what I was exploring at Darden. But I think it was a lot of self-discovery. And one of the places I came out, and then I'll take a breath, is I liked what I was doing. Like, I liked the content that I was working on. I liked compliance and ethics. I liked ESG. I liked that aspect of like kind of creating social change within a big corporation. And so post Darden, I took a spin at a finance consultancy, realized that it wasn't for me. And where I ended up today is I went in-house to go work for one of my past clients who was a client of mine for 10 years. And that's an AVP in the ethics and compliance department of Victoria's Secret. So I'll let that sit for a minute and see what your next question is.
Well, Billy, I love so much of what you shared, and your story is interesting to me. I say this as somebody who went to law school and knows that path and journey a little bit. When I hear you talk about compliance and governance and ESG and these kinds of things, I mean, it's legally related, right? It's kind of in that world a bit, but it's not just the bailiwick of lawyers, for example. Do you feel like that work still scratches whatever itch maybe led you to think about law school? How do you think about that?
I think it does, because there's legal thinking that's involved and assessing risk and being able to read really complicated, jargony contracts, documents, whatever, and pull it out. But I think the thing that I might be a little bit better at, it's almost like a competitive advantage, because I work in a compliance ethics department. Most of my colleagues that are my level are lawyers. I'm not. But I think part of my competitive advantage is I'm a little bit better at taking the concept that we're trying to teach through a policy, through training, through some new company initiative, and like make it sound like a human as opposed to make it sound like a lawyer. I think my default is a little bit more marketing focused, like sort of putting myself in the user, the employee seat, and saying like, if somebody told this to me, would I think it was a credible message, as opposed to going right to how can I jam as many clauses in this policy as possible to, cover all of our potential risk areas. So I don't know, long-winded way of saying, yes, it scratches the legal itch for sure. But I actually think that I'm better at the non-legal parts of the job. And that's one of the more valuable things to my team.
That last point is a really fascinating one. It makes me think a lot about the Darden experience and what you're actually doing in a Darden classroom, right? The root of the MBA experience at Darden is communication. It's talking in a classroom with people with different backgrounds, perspectives, experiences, appreciating other people's perspectives and experiences. And something that a lot of alumni mentioned to me is knowing those people are in the room as you're sharing your perspective and being mindful of how they might hear what you're saying. And that sounds very relevant to what you're talking about and very, very real in my that work.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of in consulting and in this job, I've done a lot of facilitated training, workshop type stuff, even like keynote speaking. And if you can't read the room, like if you can't understand I had an old colleague used to call it like the barometric pressure in the room. Like if you can't understand whether this is a high stress environment, people are relaxed, if they're absorbing your message, if they're tuning out, if they're, doing something else, like you have to kind of have a good radar for that. You can't just be focused on what you're saying. It's definitely about getting the feedback from the environment around you. I mean, for compliance and ethics and internal investigations as part of the role too, sometimes you have people that are at the most stressful moment in their corporate career talking to you. They feel like something's gone wrong. They feel like they might be retaliated against because they spoke up. They feel like they're reporting something that happened that their colleague did who they love, but they felt compelled to come forward. And so, that sort of EQ, like having the emotional intelligence to be able to understand and empathize with somebody in like maybe one of their toughest or worst moments is a huge part of the job. And if you're ignoring it, like you're not doing it right. I used to I used to be on sales calls as a consultant, and a client would say something like, we just laid off 500 people at our company, and occasionally you'd have a salesperson that would let that wash over their head and would say something like, "Great, let me tell you about the new feature in our product." And it comes off so tone deaf if you're not listening to the conversation, you're not understanding, sort of empathizing, like, okay, what are they trying to tell me? A lot of that stuff is practiced in a Darden classroom. You get better at it from listening to your colleagues, especially live versus virtual. And I think I got better at it over the 20 months of the program for sure.
Well, how did you shift from law path to an MBA is the right next step for me?
Yeah, I think I wanted to learn a number of things that I missed. So in undergrad, I obviously took accounting and a couple classes like that. But I never had a really strong finance background. And I thought, someday if I want to go in-house in a role like the one I'm in now, or I want to be a GM at a company down the road, I'm going to need to know how to be a P&L leader and manage a budget and look at variance and talk to other functions, have a good conversation with the CFO where I'm playing at their level, on metrics that they care about and, forecasts that they're building. And I felt like I knew my subject matter area, and I thought I was a pretty decent manager when I was in consulting, but I didn't have the sort of broad-based ability to play at the same level with any member of the C-suite in a future role. And so for me, I think Darden was filling in some of those gaps and kind of making me a more, I hope, like well-rounded executive. And I'll tell you, wouldn't make this up. Like I lean on, especially the finance classes, the quant classes, the stuff that I was the worst at. Going into Darden, I lean on that stuff a lot in my role to be able to have conversations across the C-suite.
So what about Darden appealed to you? I mean, knowing your story, knowing that you were in the DC metro area as you were doing your research, I'm sure location was part of the story, and as it is for a number of our students. But I wonder what else appealed to you about the Darden Executive MBA program?
A bunch of different things. I think maybe this isn't everybody's number one, but case method was probably number one for me. I know that I learned better through anecdotes and stories and being able to start with a case and work backwards to the concept. That was just important to me, that was the learning style of the vast majority, if not all, the classes. And going through the 20 plus months of the program, like I can tell you that really helped me a lot to be able to ground the concepts in, okay, here's an actual case. and actually writing a couple of cases during Darden was some of my favorite projects that I worked on. So number one, case method and the style of the classes was really important to me. And I put location right up there too. Being able to do it, I know we struggle with this word sometimes, but part-time, I mean, it's not really part-time, it's a full-time workload for sure. But being able to do it on a flexible schedule where I could go, go to class after work, go to residencies on the weekends, plan sort of my PTO around some of the amazing global trips that we went on. Like the flexibility of being able to do that without having to get on a plane for me, except for the Gemba stuff. That was really important to me. And then faculty. I had a lot of conversations with past students before. I know, like Sean Kumar, who was a friend of mine, and many, many others. And they said, look, you're going to get the best professors here no matter what. And that definitely played out. So those would be that's my short list of reasons why Darden versus somewhere else.
Yeah, case method comes up quite a bit on the podcast. And, it's interesting. I think particularly for people who've been out working for a while and also thinking about doing a program in the midst of a very full life and busy schedule and all this kind of stuff. I don't know what it would be like to work, a whole week and then, come in for that weekend residency and then just sit through a lecture. That does not sound great. And I also think the thing that we talk with prospective students about a lot is like, okay, case methods of pedagogy you're going to learn in this kind of active learning environment. One of the things I think that might be a little bit underrated when people look at the program and kind of think about that is the implication it has for who else is in the room with you and the intentions of those people. Mm-hmm. I think people tend to overlook that a little bit.
I think it gets you talking about your own stories faster. So when you tell me a story about a business problem and I have to absorb it, I think immediately you're sort of in a mindset where you're like, okay, how have I experienced this in my own career? And how can I relate it to whatever problem and story is in front of me? When you start with the lecture, the concept, sometimes it's hard to kind of step back and talk about like, well, how does this actually apply? But connecting story to story is sometimes a little bit faster.
All right, so you come to Darden. You're a brand new executive MBA student. Navigating the first year, core curriculum. Yeah. What was that like?
It's a challenge for sure. People joke sometimes about business school and getting an MBA that it's really all about networking. And that's a big part of it. But there was no joke in terms of the amount of work. And I'm not trying to scare anybody off by that. And to the point we were making before, the work kind of fits itself into whatever time you have available. But it's a commitment. I think I got used to waking up early, reading cases instead of other books that I would read before I went to sleep. But for me, anyway, I think it kind of helped me prioritize my time a little bit and get better at doing things in, 60, 90, 120-minute blocks. My best advice would be if you have a significant other, have all kinds of conversations up front with them about the time commitment. I did, but then you live it, and it's different experience when you're talking about it beforehand. And you have to have someone that's supporting you that is very patient and will understand that when you say I've got class from X to Y, like you're kind of trying to plug in and learn. And when you have a residency for a weekend, you're there with your class ideally, and you're getting the full experience, and you're not, coming home every night, or you might be staying at the hotel, even though it's the same city that you're living in. That's the best way to do the program, in my opinion, is sort of immerse yourself in it when you can, and especially for the global trips. So lots of upfront conversations about commitment with your significant other. And then same with work. I mean, I was lucky enough to, at the time at Gartner, be working for a boss that I'd had for 8 or 9 years. And so, he was in my wedding. He's a friend of mine. Like, but not everybody has that experience at work while they get an MBA. So it was easy for me to carve out the PTO and, get the letters signed on this is what I'm doing and kind of get buy-in on the work side. But those are 2 huge conversations that anybody that gets in needs to have ASAP.
Yeah, the thing that I've loved about hosting the podcast, in addition just to catching up with people I haven't seen in a little while, is hearing about all the interesting ways that students have like scraped time from their schedule. Like, oh, I had 30 minutes here, and like I used my lunch break this way, or like there was a commute time when I was going from X to Y. And I mean, I've heard everything from like PDF screen readers at 1.5 speed to like, I mean,
totally.
the list goes on. And I don't get to read that many cases, but I think sometimes people think it's going to be real dry. There's some of these cases have like a little bit of a fictional structure to them, in the sense of like so-and-so was sitting at their desk and they were thinking about, I always love those cases.
It's funny because if you read enough of them, if you read, once you get up into the hundreds of reading them, like you kind of, in a joking way, you can almost talk like you're writing a case. Like they do sort of have a cadence and like the thing about like so-and-so was staring at their desk, looking out the window. Like there's probably 50 cases that start with like some version of that first line, which is always very funny. But yeah, to your point on tricks, like we tried everything, like dragon dictation stuff and, turning cases into essentially a podcast that you could listen to on the bus or the metro. I mean, yeah, we shared all kinds of tips around that, and you figure out what works for you. Time saving for me, the thing that worked the best for me was finding a learning team that I meshed with. And if it's still the case, you kind of get assigned your first learning team. I'm still in touch with all of those guys. But learning teams kind of mix and match over the course of Darden, and you figure out, what group sort of learns like you and who has complementary skills. And, I can crush a summary of 10 chapters of reading faster, but if I can partner up with somebody that can, build a spreadsheet, like maybe that'll save some time a little bit if we can divide and conquer. So yes, there's tricks and there's some really good ones, but the people that you're there in the program with are the best time saver if you can get it right.
Yeah, you're right, Billy. We still make learning team assignments, but we also give students that flexibility to seek out another team. And, a lot of teams, it really comes down to schedules, preferred work styles, all these kinds of things. And, we're just there to we make this team assignment to get you started, and then students can kind of go forth from there. And I think it's we've taken to announcing the learning teams prior to the start of school these days, which I think students have been appreciating, because first day of school, whether it's first grade or an executive MBA program, still the first day of school. You can feel it. Like, it's amazing kind of being up on the stage, introducing the class, all that kind of stuff. Kind of feel that wave of like anxiety. People are a little bit nervous. Mm-hmm. And like just knowing there's 4 or 5 other people out there, you've had a Zoom call, and hopefully you've been coming to meetups and things that we've been doing during the summer, but not everybody's schedule permits. And, students, some of our students live far, far away. And so just knowing there's a few familiar faces and people, that easy social touch point for you as you're getting started, I think that has so much value.
Mm-hmm. I agree with all that.
Well, let's talk about your career journey, because you mentioned kind of being in this more exploratory posture when you came to the program. You mm-hmm. were considering a few different paths. And how did you kind of work through that process and ultimately say, hey, you know what, I'm a switcher?
Yeah, it's hard to say what I really ended up at. I don't even know if I would call it a switcher, because it's kind of the same field, but I did eventually switch companies. I don't know. I think for me, it was trying a little bit of everything. So, I took some of the entrepreneurship classes and talked extensively with some of my colleagues that, had started their own businesses, when I was like playing with the idea of launching my own consulting firm and doing some culture and ethics work on the side. And, I spent a decent amount of time kind of looking at what would the financials be to actually do that. I think going through that experience and talking to others was fun. It's always fun to think about doing something different, but I think I just landed on, I'm a better operator. I like the field that I'm in. I'd rather work within a system rather than try to create my own system. That kind of like X'd off the entrepreneur possibility, at least for now. Climber, I think at Gartner, and I'd already been there 13 or 14 years. I think I'd kind of done everything I wanted to do in terms of climbing the ladder and, managing bigger and bigger teams. And there's always more, but I think I was ready to try something else, learn a bit more about different companies. And so I think I kind of knew going in that while I loved my job and my boss, and especially my team, in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, I was going to be trying something else. And so that kind of leaves like the explorer switcher frame of mind. And I think one of the things in consulting, and I heard this from lots of Darden colleagues, was you give advice, you're kind of flown in to talk to the client about their problem, and you rarely get to see how it plays out. Now, if you're lucky and you work for, BCG or McKinsey, maybe you get to work on multiple modules with the same client and sort of see things in succession. But the life of a consultant in most consulting firms is you do your research, make a recommendation, and then you move on to the next problem and try to solve it and make a different recommendation. And I wanted to kind of live with the results of my decisions a little bit. Like I knew that I wanted to go in-house. And I knew that I wanted it to be at a B to C company, because I felt like something in consumer products or retail would scratch an itch that I had, which is kind of like being able to connect the work that I was doing to real life. So I guess for me, like big picture, it was just a process of elimination. I don't think that's unique. I feel like, yeah, you might talk to some colleagues that are like, yes, I'm a switcher, or yes, I'm a climber. Give them a few months, like they'll be thinking about something different after a couple more Darden classes. So I think it's a bit of a process of elimination to test each one out, see yourself in that role, and then, make the best decision for you.
That's such a good point, Billy, because we tell people all the time that, like, yes, we signal these kind of aspirational categories, but it also feels a little unfair to kind of say, well, just identify in one way, please, because the whole process of going through this program is about expansion of opportunity, expansion of your skill set, expansion of your perspective, what you feel is possible for you in the world. And with that, I do think you're right. It's like you have to put everything on the table and then kind of say, well, I know I don't like this, and I know I don't want to do that. And then eventually, through that process of elimination, you will arrive at the path, the next thing for you. And by the way, this will only continue to iterate on itself as you go forward.
Yeah, and you could be convinced to go back a way that you've already eliminated. I think that happens too. It's kind of like undergrad. Like, how many people have you ever met where they're like, yeah, I mean, this was me too. Like, oh, I applied to undergrad pre-med and ended up as an English major. Like, that's a very common collegial experience. And I think this is sort of the business school equivalent. There's always a little bit of self-discovery, no matter how much you think you're locked into, this is why I'm going to Darden.
Well, talk to us about your post-Darden path, right? So you mentioned working for, one company in some financial consulting firm, and then kind of moving to Victoria's Secret. Talk us through all of that.
Yeah. So a couple different experiences. So like I said, I was working for Gartner for a long time. I'd led different sized teams and wanted to kind of do something a little bit different. So the job I took after Gartner was with a company called ACA Group. And it was still in sort of the compliance and ethics space, but for a totally different audience. So now we're in financial services, chief compliance officers at private equity shops and hedge funds. And interesting challenge as building a product for them. So it was more of the equivalent of like a product manager role for those that know what that looks like at a tech company or a consumer products company where like I had a product that I was building and working with all different functions to be able to try and get it off the ground, but still in the subject matter expertise space that I knew. Very cool experience. Wouldn't give it back. Running a product and trying to build something new. But financial services was tough for me. I mean, very highly regulated, very technical. It can take decades to really know the space and understand how the SEC looks at all the different compliance things that financial firms have to deal with. And I'd had like more of a generalized experience where I'd worked with all different industries and consulting. I'd never really focused on financial services. And so the learning curve was just steep. And I found out reasonably soon that it wasn't necessarily the space that I wanted to be in. And so serendipity, and like, this is how these things sometimes happen. Like I got a call from an ex-client who is a friend of mine, Forrest Egan. He was the chief compliance officer at Abercrombie and Fitch for many years. And he was moving to Victoria's Secret. If anybody knows the history here, Victoria's Secret used to be part of L Brands. So L Brands as a company had all of these different retail brands under it. Lane Bryant, Abercrombie and Fitch, Bath and Body Works, Victoria's Secret. They kind of divested a number of those brands over the years and landed on the final two, which were Bath and Body Works and Victoria's Secret. And then last year spun both companies off into their own separate IPOs. So it was going to work for a pretty well-known established brand globally. Another thing that I liked about this job is I can talk about global experience a little bit and how that's helped. But doing it for a company where they were still kind of in a building startup-y mode. So it was almost this job was best of both. It's a company that has mature operations and a really well-known brand, but because of the IPO, was kind of splitting things off from a larger company and willing to look at building stuff from the ground up again. And then, for moving in-house, having your boss be somebody that you've known for 10 years before you walk in on day one is like, not everybody gets that experience. And I'm thankful that that's the context that I get to learn how to do this job in. But yeah, I don't know that it was, I think just being open to opportunities as they pop up, going into things with an open mind, trying to figure out what you're going to learn and how it's going to advance your career and how it's going to be different and complementary to your past experiences. Like those are the things that those are the hills that I'm willing to die on. I don't know that you would look at me and you would say, that's a guy that works for Victoria's Secret. It's more like, that's a guy that should be starting his own brewery. And so I think like that it is interesting when I talk to people now. They're like, oh, you work for Victoria's Secret. Like, how is that? And they have questions about Angels and Heidi Klum and things like that. And, I know the history of the company, but I think in ethics and compliance, you want to go where there's work to be done. And first 3 months at Victoria's Secret have been pretty amazing in terms of the turnaround that the brand is trying to go after, and the focus on ethics and reputation, and doing right by our clients and their customers. So it's been great so far.
Must be interesting to work for a brand that is globally well known and probably has supply chain that spans the globe and customers all over the world and I think about the complexity of this business. I mean, it's got to be fascinating, Billy.
Massive crash course in everything supply chain for me, because part of my job in ethics and compliance involves third-party risk management and anti-corruption, anti-bribery. And so, boil that down to sounding like a human, not like a lawyer. And it's making sure that all the partners that Victoria's Secret works with are the right ones for us, vetting them in various ways, doing due diligence. And part of my job is global. So we have offices in Sri Lanka and China and Vietnam and India. And later this year, I'll be basically doing a, hopefully, fingers crossed, on travel around the world tour to be able to introduce myself to some people live that can kind of be my eyes and ears on the ground for spotting some of those bribery and corruption related issues. And I don't think that I would be nearly as confident in doing that had I not been to China, been to India, been to Brazil, spent time in other markets with Darden, going to visit companies and talking about the culture. I'm 100% sure that there's still a million things that I need to learn, but not going in cold to that kind of global executive job, it's going to be super invaluable.
Yeah, I was going to ask about your experience as a GEMBA format student. For our listeners who are just learning about the Executive MBA program, there are two formats. There's an EMBA format or Executive MBA format, and there's a Global Executive MBA format. As you may be picking up from what Billy's sharing here, GEMBA students, they travel 4 times during the course of the program. And the global residency options, we're now up to like a menu of potentially 12 global residency locations, expansion. Wow. I mean, it's a significant expansion in terms of the global offerings. I have to believe getting outside the U.S. was a real eye-opener for you in your program experience.
Huge, extremely important and fun and useful part of the Darden program for me. And even like being able to triangulate between the first global residency and the third or fourth one, I think made a huge difference for me. So we went to go see the inside of a GM factory in Brazil. Tons of workers on the floor, very little automated. Then we went to go see GM joint venture factory in China. I don't think there was a person on the floor. It was almost 100% automated. And so, be able to kind of see the difference in the business environment in some of these places and make those kinds of comparisons, I wouldn't trade it. That was, for me, one of the best parts of the program.
I had the chance to go with our class of 2021 to Embraer in Brazil.
Awesome. I remember that trip very well.
It is, first of all, it's, this, incredibly, proud company, one of Brazil's, really star companies, recently been acquired by Boeing, I believe. And they're kind of going through that process while we were there, which is interesting. But just being able to go to the company headquarters, to walk the floor, to see the planes going through this assembly line manufacturer, to hear from the program manager for the E2, the newest plane they developed, about that process and how they managed it. And it was ahead of schedule and I think under budget. I mean, I can tell you can go to Sao Paulo as a tourist. You're not doing that. You're not getting that kind of access.
Definitely. I remember sitting in that room and watching that presentation. I mean, I definitely have a very vivid memory of that. And to your point, even with the Boeing acquisition, they are one of the jewel companies of the country. I mean, it's like the equivalent of a McDonald's or Coca-Cola kind of, maybe that's sad, but kind of thing in the US, or maybe we could find a better country level example. Going to Toulouse in France, Airbus is takes over that town, and it's the same thing, but for Brazil. And that was a very cool experience.
Well, Billy, an additional question before we kind of wrap up here. You feel like your Darden experience helps you as you navigate everything at Victoria's Secret? Anything that you pull on in particular? I think it's always fun to hear how alums, even if they've been out for a couple of years, are maybe drawing on what they did as a student.
Yeah. I don't mean that to sound contemplative. Yes, for sure. I pull on my Darden experience weekly, if not daily. I think if I have to kind of wrap it up with a bow on the things that really stuck with me, it was definitely the time management skills that Darden taught me, how to get a significant amount of work done in the time that you have, It was all of the quant skills. I'm much better at being able to read a balance sheet and analyze a filing and understand the numbers in the business that I'm in because of all the quant and finance core classes at Darden. Like that was a huge value add for me. Not for everybody. Some people have that stuff, cold when they walk into Darden, but that was big for me. And then this is the answer that I'm sure everybody gives, but it's the people. Being able to bounce ideas off of people that were in my class as I thought about switching jobs, as I've become a parent, just having 200 people that are willing to give advice and give you the things that they learned from going through it. You can't beat that. So I would say every week I draw on some combination of soft skills. That would be like time management, technical skills. Those would be the finance core classes, and then the network. Somebody that I'm talking to that can give me some insight into what they've done before.
Well, Billy, we always ask the same last question of all of our guests here on the podcast. I wonder if you have a piece of advice that you would share with our listeners as they contemplate their own MBA journeys.
I think it goes back to something I was saying earlier, which is when you make the decision to get an MBA, take the classes that are harder for you. Challenge yourself with the stuff that you don't know, because you likely are paying a lot of money for the privilege of, all the great things about Darden. And, don't take the class that you already know really well. Do the stuff that scares you a little bit. And then when you look back years after you're in the program, you'll be very glad that you did.
I love that advice, because I think there's something that happens for people in this program. If you do that, if you take those classes that are intimidating or maybe feel a little bit scary to you, we have all these formed ideas about who we are. And, when people come to this program, they're oftentimes in their late 20s, early mid 30s, early 40s. So our self-conception is pretty formed. And by taking those classes, kind of seeking out those challenges, you can prove to yourself that you can do more than what you thought, that how you would define yourself is perhaps not the full story. You've got skills, you have abilities, you have talents beyond what you maybe initially thought. Like you may think, like, I'm not a quantitative person. And you actually learn that actually I can do all this stuff. I can learn finance. I can do DA. I can take the mergers and acquisitions class. I can do entrepreneurial finance. And that sense of capacity building that I think happens for students is possibly one of the most powerful things psychologically that happens for students in the program.
Like learning what your capacity is, I think that's 100% right. I also think like the nature of Darden and most top business schools, if not all of them, is like it's people that have been pretty successful in almost everything they've ever done. And frequently, I'll put myself in this category, a lot of like type A people that think that they need to get an A in everything. And, chase whatever the top grade is in the class or top 10% or whatever the plaudits are, the equivalent. I think it's more about what you learn and what you take away. And that's why if you do the stuff that's hard, even if your learning will be greater, you have increased your capacity that much more through the challenge than by doing the stuff that you were already good at.
Well, Billy, it is always such a pleasure catching up with you. Congratulations to your family on the new addition, baby Kate in this world. And so excited for everything that's happening for you. When I saw the update on LinkedIn that you were now working at Victoria's Secret, I was like, we got to get Billy on the podcast. There's a story here. I would love to hear what
there is a story. There is a story. Well, I'll throw it back at you for the very last thing. What's your best piece of sort of, you've seen a lot of people go through parenting through Darden, like your best piece of parenting advice, either that you've heard or lived or gotten from somewhere?
Oh gosh, wow. All right. I appreciate this. Colin Wright Prusky came on the podcast. He did the exact same thing to me. I asked him a question. He was like, you know what, Brett? I think you probably know it better than I do. So I very rarely give parenting advice, Billy, but being around moms and dads who have done this program, I'm going to come back to something you shared previously, because I think the parents who are able to really successfully navigate this program are those folks who are so intentional about how they're using their time and how they're communicating with their partner, their significant other, their spouse, whomever the other people that are in their household are. Because one, where I see students kind of get tripped up a bit is when they're trying to be in every place at the same time, right? So I'm here at school, but I'm trying to think about home and work stuff, and I'm at home, but I'm trying to think about school. Like, I actually think, and this may be counterintuitive to people, the intention of saying, look, this is my school time. I'm doing school, and this is my home. This is my family time. I'm here. I'm fully focused on this. That is something that I've seen parents really do successfully in the program. And I think that presence is really valuable for people, because it's when your mind feels really split and you feel kind of like you're trying to be in two or three places, that causes kind of an anxiety for people. It can be very hard to sustain that for extended periods of time. And I just see the parents kind of divide up their time in very thoughtful and intentional ways. And they may not start at that place when they begin the program, but I think they get there. And the other thing that I've heard, and I had a conversation with Stephen Weir here on the podcast about this, is like every 2 months, every quarter, sit down, because his family had a newborn, as they were navigating the program. Every 2 months, sit down. What do we have going on as a family? Let's build out the calendar together. This is what my school schedules look like. These are the classes I'm taking. This is my sense of these classes and how much time they might require for me, and trying to set that expectation early. And I think it's easier for people to have the conversation as, they're embarking upon the program, like in the summer and spring, you're kind of trying to engage about that. You probably feel like you have a lot more time to have those conversations. When you get into the flow of the program and everything, you may not feel like you have as much time, but that's probably why the conversation is even more important at that point, because it can get really easy to put it off and not talk about it. But being very intentional about how you communicate with your partner, I think is absolutely critical for people in this program.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think for me, that's what made it work. The sitting down with the calendar, Stephen Weir style, for sure. And like getting good at the context switching. Like, it's funny because it's like, let's just say you block out your time and it's like, okay, these 2 hours are for work. These 2 hours are for family. These 2 hours are for school. That's fine. But if your transitions aren't like very good, it can kind of feel like you're racking focus in between some things, and you don't necessarily do any of them very well. And so I think learning how to transition from this is my school time to this is my family time, this is my work time, and do it in the right mood. And I think assume positive intent, all the time. I feel like we talked about that in LR1, and it is maybe that's probably the best piece of advice for Darden, both with your home life and for all of your colleagues at Darden. If you can just go into every interaction assuming positive intent, you're probably going to have a better time with it.
Well, Billy, great to talk with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and congratulations on everything. So happy for you.
Thanks for having me. And I'll throw it up to anybody that is considering Darden, exec program, Gemba, any of the versions. If you want to talk about it, I'm always around. Shoot me a LinkedIn message. Happy to tell you more about my experience.
And that was my interview with Billy Hughes, a Gemba format graduate in our Executive MBA class of 2020. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's EXECMBA@darden.virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.